there's a rippling effect that if you can take the education back to the community, whether it's small town or it's South Dallas, Deep Ellum, that you build relationships and formation and flourishing around multi-generational care. And unfortunately, our universities are really good at destroying those core ties that bind. Like they're specifically designed to break those and to extract the people. And I'm all about education, but I'm not all about destroying the kind of rooted connectivity of what does a flourishing society need. This is not normal. Whatever happened, this is not good. It's not beautiful. It's not normal. And I know that there's another way because I've smelled it and I've tasted it and I've lived it. How do we rebuild what formation and flourishing should actually look like?
Hello and welcome back to the Hannah Frankman podcast. On today's episode, I'm speaking with Nicholas Ellis. Nick is the founder of Christian Halls, an organization that offers degree programs and apprenticeship programs to small communities across the country to give their young people another option besides moving to the big city and contributing to the brain drain that's plaguing so many of our small communities across the country. In today's episode, we talk about Nick's experience growing up homeschooled and going to some of the world's most elite universities. We talk about where the idea of Christian Halls was born and why he feels so strongly about saving small town America and why he thinks the education options in these small towns is part of the key to making them a place where young people want to stay. We talk about how the model has been built out and how it runs. And we also spend some time talking about other shared interests like the Microschool Movement, like our shared Mennonite background. This was a really fun conversation, and I hope you enjoy listening. Welcome to the podcast.
It's great to be here.
Thank you so much for making the time on your whirlwind trip to Austin.
Yeah. Well, it's great. We talked on a Zoom call, but this is great to be in person. I love your work.
Thank you. The feeling is very mutual. We're going to spend like an hour nerding out about what you're doing, which I'm super excited about. But I want to know first, because you flew here in a small plane, which is, you travel all over the country this way, right?
Yeah.
This sounds amazing.
Well, as we began to see all of these communities come to us, and we'll talk more about what we do, but there's just so many communities that have recognized that they're dying. They're dying because of lack of human resources. And 4 years ago, I had started driving. I had this beat up old Suburban that I just started. I had a mattress in the back. It's like a poor man's RV, right? Just go around. And I was driving literally like Midland to Texas, where we live, to Montana, up to northern Washington, over to Maine, through the Midwest, down to Miami. That year, I put about 135,000 miles on that Suburban, just town by town by town. And finally, a donor came to us and was like, have you ever thought about flying to these places? And I have a brother who's a pilot, so it's not a foreign concept to me, but it was like, no, we're not going to do that. He was like, seriously, I've got an old 1966 Cessna 182 that's in pretty good shape. And why don't I give it to you guys? Because he was older. And so why don't I just give it to you? I'll pay for your license and for your lessons. And I kind of thought it was a gimmick. But because so many of our communities, these Christian halls, are in local towns, off the highway, off the interstate, for me to get to a place like Sterling, Nebraska, it was like get up at 3 a.m., catch a flight to Dallas, catch a flight to Omaha, and then drive 6 hours from Omaha to some small rural town. And I was like, I'm going to give it a shot, because it was only like a 3-hour flight from Midland to Sterling. Well, I caught the bug, and last year I spent 470 hours in that plane.
Wow.
Yeah. Little town to little town, there's always a small rural airport, and you just go in and you meet and you discuss and you design and you figure out what the needs for that community look like. And then you fly to the next town. So I basically live in that little plane at this point.
That
Yeah.
sounds
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. One of our big asks for donors is like, just pay for my fuel. Just help me get around, town by town. And but it's been transformative because I love small town America. I've always thought that was really the backbone of the self-governance and the flourishing of America. And with the centralization of corporate America, of education, of all these other things to the large cities, the small towns kind of have been abandoned. And but there's just amazing people. There's amazing entrepreneurial opportunities. There's a great place to build a business and a family and all that other stuff. But you have to get there. And so aviation's basically allowed me to get out to all these places. So yeah. So flew here in a little Cessna, and I'll take off in a little Cessna and head home.
We have to talk a little bit about what it is that you do.
Yeah.
We'll come back to the small town America thing because there's a lot to unpack there. But talk a little bit about what this project is that you're building.
Yeah, it's great. Well, I grew up on the mission field planting schools. And so across Brazil, across South America, we've planted over 600 small, sometimes urban, many actually in São Paulo, many urban schools. But I became very concerned about having built over 600 of these small schools that the kids would leave, and we do all this work to do like K through 12, like to 18th, 18 years old, and then they would have to leave their communities. And so I left, did my studies I kind of traveled all over the place, did my studies in Jerusalem for my Hebrew studies, and then northern Wisconsin for an environmental science program, and in Germany for my German studies, and ended up at Oxford where I did my master's and my doctorate. And so I was already very comfortable like customizing ways of studying. I never was just like, feed me whatever you have and I'll just sign up for it and pay my student loans. Like I was never a believer in that. I always thought, we could design an educational pathway that fit my needs, my vision, what I wanted to go build. And I was looking for a model that I could take post-secondary, so like from dual credit, high school, through undergraduate, graduate, and then increasingly a real interest in skilled trades. Because our communities, I think we all now are starting to see. In fact, this afternoon, talking to Mike Rowe, he would have been a great partner on this show. And we're talking to him about a partnership to really advance local skilled trade education. So from dual credit, high school, through the trades, through undergraduate, and then looking at what are the needs of these communities. Well, every community I go to, we want to train our own teachers. We hire in teachers from outside. They stay a couple of years and they're gone. We want to train our own lawyers. So this morning, meeting with the Supreme Court here in Austin to talk about a apprenticeship-based law school program that we can train local lawyers that are from those towns, police officers, mayors, tradesmen. How do you create a model that actually puts place first, then people, then the academic vendors and programs? Right now, the universities, the educational industrial complex, as I call it, they prioritize their programs. Then they treat the people as their consumers, and they never really think about place. They never really think about how do you create a deeply flourishing formational place. And so that was what was driving us. And when I walked into Oxford and found this ancient, unique model of the small group tutorial program, where with the tutor in a college, in one of these dozens of colleges and private halls all over Oxford, sitting with groups of 1 to 3 to 5 students, discussion, dialectic, debate, and then the university serves as kind of the accrediting body, was in that program, taught in that program, and said, I think I can go build a similar kind of program in these different communities. And so we approached about a dozen different universities that had online programs. And the great irony of what we're doing is we leverage on online education, but we don't trust it. Like it has not, online digital education, kind of a soulless digital transfer, has not proven to be effective at forming and shaping virtuous people. And yet, I don't have enough capital to go build hundreds of small universities in every little town in America. And so what we did is we partnered with these universities, acquired the rights to their degree programs, dual credit high school, bachelor's, master's, PhDs, and now a whole line of certified trades. And we go to these communities and we ask, where are the wise, virtuous elders in these towns that have a lifetime of experience, that have a love for discipleship, a love to pour into their community. And we create a little Oxford-style college where the students are kind of a joint membership. They have a local membership in that what we call a hall, which are those subject matter tutors that know math and science and business and criminal justice or whatever. We typically start with like a general education, like a JUCO, like a junior college, community college. And then we build toward the majors as the market demand requires it and as we have local tutors. And so this has created this growing network of independent, locally owned and operated learning communities that we call Christian Halls, or Christian Halls International is our organization. We serve and resource them with degree programs and certifications, but they're able to build a small, hyper-localized post-secondary learning community that prioritizes their place. So I just came out of Corsicana. That was where I was before here. And there's a great little shop up there called Collins Street Bakery, which has been there for since 1880. It's like a cornerstone bakery in the town. And their ownership loves that town. Like they're firmly convinced that Corsicana is the best small town in America. And they want to build the future of that community. And so to have them pull in the mayor and some pastors and the school leadership, the classical academy leadership, local businessmen, and say, how could we take back governance in the post-secondary space that has become in North America this, highly colonized, highly centralized ecosystem? What would it look like for us to train our own people for our place, elevate our elders, give them a role in the discipleship kind of tutorial space, turn them into like the Oxford tutors? And your listeners could look up, Oxford tutorials and see what that looks like. But we're turning these local elders into the tutors without me having to go build new accreditation, because I have all of these universities that we basically have turned into vendors. And we've said to them, if you provide us with affordable, quality education that serves our local needs, we'll use your product. If you screw us with ideology, with debt, with all of the things that have kind of become the modern American university, we're going to fire you and we're going to find another vendor.
What does that look like in practice, using these universities as vendors? Like, what are they actually providing for you, and how does that fit into the structure of what you're building locally?
Yep, it's good. Excellent.
Especially from the student experience standpoint.
Yep. So we can take their classes and their degree programs, and that typically is the product that they can offer us. They're starting to move into skilled trades. They're starting to move into some of these other areas, but their standard product that they've tried to sell us for really the last, couple hundred years, really 150 years, is degree programs, bachelor's, master's, professional degrees, those kind of things.
And you said that you purchased the degree programs from these universities, or you're partnering with them? How does it work?
We have the license to be able to take their programs. So let's just say that I want to do a teacher college.
Mm-hmm.
So in Midland, Texas, where I'm at, we have about a 35% annual churn of teachers.
That's so high.
Huge turnover, because we send our best and brightest young ladies away to a typically, let's just say, not conservative teacher college here in Texas. They typically don't come back, but if they do come back, we're typically hiring teachers from outside of our community. They don't really want to be in Midland. So they stay a year, they stay a couple of years, and they're gone. And so I take that degree in classical education, primary, secondary education, those kind of things, and I set up a local teacher college with retired teachers from around the area that love Midland, and they want to see Midland flourish. And I have the degrees from, say, West Texas A&M, from Houston Christian University, from Southeastern University, different universities, and we can say, we're going to offer this degree in, let's say, classical education or English or special needs. We have a whole special needs program that we offer. And our local students join that local hall where instead of sitting online by themselves at a university, every week they're engaged with these teachers. They're doing student teaching at local schools. They have practicums and tutorials. And as they're submitting their work, before they submit their university work for grading, what does the typical online experience look like today? You log into your Canvas account, you watch your lectures, you bang out an essay, you hit submit. You've never discussed it. You've never talked about it. Maybe you've had some required forum posts. People are like, yeah, that didn't do anything. And then the professor on the other side gets, 90 essays and is like 85, 83, 62. Oh, that's pretty good. 100, no engagement, no interaction. And it's just this very mechanical process. And we would want to insert into that rich, deep, local formational opportunities with retired teachers, with student teaching, all of that kind of formational stuff.
So are the students still doing the online coursework from the university that they would be doing if they were enrolled in online classes, but then it's being supported by all of this local instruction?
Yeah,
so it's sort of like a two-pronged
typically,
experience?
yes. It's kind of a two-pronged experience. And then we work with the universities to kind of customize the experience so it actually dovetails in to what we're doing. In my opinion, our universities have become basically the next generation of digital publishers. It's the next Gutenberg publishing press. That's what it is. It's a way of disseminating information and knowledge. If we treat it like that, okay, it's good technology. If we pretend that there is this whole kind of whole person, rich formational thing that happens, suddenly it starts to decay and we all know it. Like everybody in the industry. And now with AI and ChatGPT, we audited one of our universities and 75% of the students were writing their papers with ChatGPT, right? Well, kind of knew that. What we did not anticipate is that 85% of the professors were using ChatGPT to grade the papers. And so you just have these two AI engines talking back and forth to each other, and there's no actual human in the room. And so what we want to do is we want to ensure that there's always actual human formational discipleship, mentorship, relationships taking place. So it's not just this kind of digital transfer that happens that is proving to be less and less humane. It's proving to actually not create deep, rich formational relationships, and certainly not deploying these kids back into their community to have a deep, multi-generational impact in their communities.
Well, it speaks to the extent to which the university experience for so many young people is just about checking boxes and going through the motions. Like they don't, if you cared about understanding the information, you might still use ChatGPT to help find resources that you're looking for. And you can ask it questions, say, I don't understand this. Can you give me another example? It can be extremely helpful as a study buddy.
Great tool.
But if you're using it as sort of like an assistant that does the work for you so you don't have to do it, it just speaks to the fact that all of these things that you're being required to do as entry into the workforce is not deemed valuable. It's just hoops to jump through, which I think is how most kids learn how to think about school at a very young age, and certainly think about it by the time they get to secondary and post-secondary education. I'm so curious how you think about the sort of the value proposition to your students or your prospective students in these communities, because part of the reason that students want to leave and go to college in a big city is because of the opportunity that they're exposed to. both in terms of the types of connections that they can make, which the internet does change. You don't have to go to the city to meet people who share similar interests to you the way you did in like the 1980s. You can meet them digitally now, but I'm very curious because so many people leave their small towns, not just because they feel like there isn't opportunity there, but also because they just want to sort of experience a vastness of opportunity at the university level, maybe before they come back. I'm really curious, like, how you kind of would describe your average student, and also like what the biggest things are besides just career training that you're offering them that makes it compelling for them to stay. Because I think a lot of young people, like, the small town life experience is better than the city life experience in so many ways.
They'll eventually figure that out.
Yeah, it takes, sometimes it takes a while.
That's right.
But there's also, you know, like, you're young and you're unmarried and you want to find your future spouse, and maybe there just like aren't a lot of people in your town, and you feel like the odds are better if you go to a bigger college, or you want to meet people who love theater like you do and have a bigger theater experience, or, you know, there's so many different reasons. How do you create these environments in these smaller communities that serve those types of needs?
Yep, that's good. So let me divide the question between the small town and just the question of community in general, because like we have some sites in Arlington, Texas, right? 600,000 person suburb of a 7 million person, you know, megapolis, which can be even more isolating than a small town.
How so?
Where are your relationships? Where are your networks? You know, you can very much disappear into the suburban, you know, blasé of like, I don't have a town square. I don't have a community. This is just a sleeper community, and everybody shuts their garage doors, and maybe I have some people at church. But community relationships and deep networks is not just isolated to, well, I can't find that in a small town. It can also be very much in the suburban and urban environments. And so I would say that you should think about what we're doing as community and place-based. Many of those are identified as small towns. But increasingly, we're starting to move into these urban environments where they're saying, we want the benefit, and this comes to the answer to your question. We want the benefit of multi-generationalism. We want our uncles and our aunts and our parents and our grandparents. And when I leave, I'm stepping away from an entire ecosystem of support, as well as things like, now I can't, you know, build a house on my parents' property, or I can't, you know, now I have to go into debt, not just for the student loan side, but for the housing side. And so there's all of these things that happen in the modern American life when you isolate and atomize yourself away from your foundations. And the problem is we've forgotten how to do this. Like, it doesn't naturally happen in small towns because small towns have forgotten how to do this. Like the little town where I was born in, you know, southeast Nebraska, there's meth and there's not a whole lot else, you know. So it does create this vicious cycle of, well, there's nothing here. We've forgotten how to do multi-generationalism. We've sold the farms. It's all corporate owned anyways. And so I guess I have to leave, you know. So we are fighting a whole cycle. But if I were to say that kind of the ideal vision that we're trying to build towards, it's that when there is a student who is looking at, you know, graduating from high school, and let's say that they know they want to go into public administration or politics. Currently, the choice is I can send them to Stanford or wherever, A&M, you know, here we are in Texas. They can leave, they can go build their own network. And where do they end up working? Well, they don't have a deep, rich, trusted relationship with the local mayor and, you know, city council and those kind of things. They have to kind of work their way through kind of a state network system. And eventually maybe they end up working in middle management for the state of Texas, or maybe they end up working for a campaign somewhere here in Austin. But they've never been given the opportunity of actually building like deep, rich, trusted relationships with the mayor and city council and the sheriff's office and those kind of things. That option isn't even on the table for most of these kids. So if I can come in with a criminal justice program or a public administration or a campaign management program kind of in that civic space, partner with the university for accreditation, but then apprentice them into city hall, sheriff's office, those kind of things, now I can actually build civic structures that have long-term impact. And if you want to talk about things like criminal justice reform, well, people complain about the tension between police and local communities. But when we import all of our rural cops from Dallas, Fort Worth, and they don't know any of the people and haven't grown up with any of the people, and now it's just enmity between this imported lawman and these town people that are kind of my enemy, and I think they're going to try to kill me because I don't know them. Well, what if we start at the root of let's build civic leaders that love their place and love their people? And so there's a rippling effect that if you can take the education back to the community, whether it's small town or it's South Dallas, Deep Ellum, I don't really care, that you build relationships and formation and flourishing around multi-generational care. And unfortunately, our universities are really good at destroying those core ties that bind. Like they are specifically designed to break those and to extract the people. And I'm all about education, but I'm not all about destroying the kind of rooted connectivity of what does a flourishing society need. So I'm trying to re-engineer the education piece, and people think I'm in education, but I'm really in community design. Like, how do you build flourishing places using the human capital that God's placed in those communities? So I think that if you see that as like the foundational question around how do you build a flourishing community, then you can start to build experiences and programs and products to deal with what you're talking about, which is student experience, the whole college experience, opportunities. So we have a phenomenal study abroad program where, in classics and humanities and whatever, you can go to a incredible little monastery in Greece that we partner with right off the Corinthian Bay that's 12 miles down from Delphi. And you can do all of your classics and all of your greats, in that place. So we're not trying to build like this weird, like the village, like you can never leave. What we're trying to do is to say, how do we create a governance structure that the people that are helping these students make life choices in education have access to the world, local, state, national, and global opportunities, but the people that are helping them make that decision are not the admissions officer holding the promissory note for a lifetime of debt. It's a governance question. Who should be helping guide and determine these decisions? And man, if there is a really super talented young lawyer that has been trained locally and is excelling, and maybe they should be state attorney general. Maybe we should elevate them to that level. We're not trying to say that there's no opportunities out of your town. We're trying to say is, where does that human formational space, where do we center that? And we've come to the point where we no longer trust our universities for that human formational governance.
This is so akin to so much of what I see in the trends in primary and secondary education as well. I don't know how familiar you are with the microschool movement. I would assume quite.
I'm starting to get familiar with it because the microschools are coming to us saying, we already have some of these structures. Could we just do a 13th and 14th grade on top of our microschool? So really interested in the emergence of the microschool movement.
Is one of the things that I'm most excited about that I'm seeing emerging, because it, to the point that you're making, it brings the locus of control back to the local.
Yep.
And it's wild to me that we've gone this long without the locus of control being local, because all of the incentives, like the incentive structures, are such that it need it to be local to get the best results. Because when you try to build an institutionalized state level and to some extent federal level education system for K-12, you can't run a system like that without the system prioritizing its own survival and its own efficiency. Like part of what makes it work at this huge bureaucratic level is that it is heavily systematized. And when you have this big system that's prioritizing its own running over the experience of the individual student, you're not going to get the best student outcomes, and you can't allow for the customization on a classroom level and a teacher level and a local level that's going to serve the kids.
And that's in the best case scenario.
Yes,
discounting
putting it politely.
Discounting the elements of graft corruption that we've all seen. Like now you've created a system that in the very best case scenario, you have inefficiencies and you have a delocalized expression, but you also have created an enormous opportunity for corruption and graft. And that's what we're starting to see now as we're diving into these large federal programs. A lot of it is just a way of sucking away resources.
Yes.
So that's the other side of it. We want to protect ourselves from that. But to your point, even in the best case scenario, the system that's set up is there to help support and sustain itself as opposed to local.
Right. It has to prioritize sustaining itself, or otherwise it will die. So it by nature cannot prioritize the students first. But when you're operating an education system on a local level, you both can customize the education to be hyper-local. History can be local history. You can go learn about the history of your town, which is so enriching compared to learning about state history and national history and world history is super important and it's fascinating and it gives kids so much richness in their understanding of the world. But it's not real in the same way that walking into the library that's in what once was the general store, which was once owned by the same man who, built the industry that caused the railroad to come through town. There's so much tangible understanding that comes from the local that you can build an entire curriculum around, and you can tailor your program to the needs of the individual students who are within it. When you're talking about, educating elementary schoolers, you can design it exactly around the needs of the kids, but all the incentives are also local. So the teacher is employed at the pleasure of the parents. And if the parents are not happy with the education that their kids are getting, they'll replace the teacher. And all of the incentives are such that you're actually educating the kids with the intention of the kids in mind. And there's such a movement towards that, both in smaller communities and in big cities. And I'm so excited about it because I think this trend towards the hyper urban is it's a very strange modern phenomenon, but it's also very unnatural in many ways to how humans want to live and how they thrive.
Absolutely.
And it's been necessitated in some ways. We've been in this weird sort of bottleneck of innovation where so much is happening in the big cities and all the opportunities are there, but we sort of innovated our way out of it again, where so many jobs are remote now. You don't have to be in a big city. So much information is remote. Kids can stay in their small town and learn from universities in a big city that have these big city resources, but you don't have to go there. And that's true for all sorts of information. And I think society hasn't really caught up yet, but all the infrastructure is in place, practically speaking.
That's right.
To be able to bring the locus of control back to where it more naturally resides.
That's right.
And so what you're talking about is very exciting to me because it's mapping onto these same trends that I'm also seeing as I'm talking to people. The hunger is there for this.
Right. And the microschool is such a really, it's just a fascinating place to start because, when I show up into a small town or a suburban environment, whatever, and I'm looking for who to build with, I'm typically not trying to build from scratch. I'm not typically saying, okay, let me go grab a bunch of elders and, parents and business leaders, and we're going to create something from scratch. I do that. But it's far easier when I can identify, here's an already kind of natural organic gathering of mentors and elders and tutors and teachers and students. Well, that typically is homeschool groups, microschools, classical schools, public schools, businesses, and civic enterprise. Those tend to be the big six. And if you have a wise and aware church, then frequently that church can be a seventh. The American church has kind of abandoned this vision of being the center of human formation, so there's some reform that needs to happen there. But the problem with the homeschool groups, and we love homeschoolers. I I homeschooled all the way through. We homeschool our kids. We love the freedom and flexibility. The problem is there's no structure. And so when you start to move into this kind of higher ed tutorial space, they don't know how to create long-term structures. And so we have to help them build structure. On the other extreme, if a local classical school already breaking the mold, they're already edgy, they're already kind of revolutionary, they tend to be stodgy. And they tend to, and homeschoolers do this too, but they tend to self-congratulate themselves and show their own success by sending as many kids away to the Ivies as possible. And then because they have very good academic outcomes, and then they say, see, we were just as good. We're better than the public schools because we sent all our kids away. And they're actually destroying their own community and congratulating themselves by sending everybody away. And so I have to kind of reframe what success looks like for a classical school by saying, why don't you just keep doing this? Why are you stopping? Who told you that you gave up governance at 12th grade? What Horace Mann Prussian model have you bought into that says your governance ends at 18 and now they're someone else's? They're no longer the communities. They're either the states or the corporations or they're the universities. You no longer have space here. And we're trying to return that governance posture back. And so right in between the homeschoolers, which are super like early adopters, move fast, break things, unafraid, classical schools and private schools, which are stodgy and they have boards. They want to be around. They have structure, which is good, but they're disincentivized in some ways. Right in the middle, you've got a microschool, which kind of has more structure than a homeschool co-op, but more self-governance than a private school. And the growth of the microschool movement is actually really interesting for us because it shares a lot of cultural, spiritual, community-based governance impulses that we're looking for. So I'm really interested to see that grow. It'll be interesting to see what structures emerge from that because it's so new. I think that my main concern is that we keep those local community leaders in the governance seat because the technological publishing companies have for, I would say, too long been the ones that ultimately end up governing the space.
Do you feel like there is a substantial desire among young people for what you're offering, or do you feel like there's a stronger desire from, like you keep talking about the community elders who are helping to steward your program into their communities? Do you feel like the hunger is stronger from the older, wiser, more established individuals of a community, and they're sort of trying to sell the younger people on the vision? Because so much of our sort of collective culture is pushing attention for young people towards big cities, towards, if you want to be successful in life, you don't think about rising to the top of your local community. You're thinking about going to work at a tech company in your state's biggest city because that's sort of the collectively agreed upon metric of success. So there's this sort of almost mythos that used to exist in American culture. So much of Americana is the small town, but there was this sort of mythos of this idea of the elder statesman of the small community that you keep talking about, that
That's gone.
People don't think about it at all anymore. It's not even a part of the frame of reference. So do you feel like there is an innate hunger in the young people in the communities you're going to, or is it a thing that you have to sell them on, this vision of what could be?
Well, we have to distinguish between different affinity groups and cultural groups, right? I showed up in McAllen, Texas, flew down there. The city manager asked me to come down, and they were having a little homeschool conference. 1,000 Hispanic homeschool moms showed up.
Wow.
Blew my mind.
How big is McAllen?
Well, it was moms from like Laredo to Brownsville. It's the whole valley, like the Rio Grande Valley.
Wow.
So Hispanic, bilingual, distinctive culture, incubated, with a very strong interest and desire in seeing the flourishing of the valley. And their statement to me was, we're so sick of sending our kids away to institutions that don't like our culture. They hate our religion. They don't understand who we are, and they break us.
Sending to Caesar and having them come back Romans.
That's right. And they still, what's amazing about that affinity group, strongly Catholic. And so they still have the old, the memory of the Spanish missions. So one lady took me aside and was like, we could just rebuild the Spanish missions up and down the valley and we could govern it. Like, we know our elders. Grandpa and grandma are still in the homes. We run family businesses. We want to build this kind of structure for the valley. Compare that with North Dallas, wealthy, a private school that has a median income of $600,000. Do you think that they have any memory of like multi-generational local place? That they would long for this? The grandparents, the wealthy grandparents in that community are like, I've lost my grandkids. They're gone. But culturally, it's a very different conversation if you're talking to somebody in the Valley versus somebody in North Dallas. So there is no one answer. But I think if we were going to generalize, we're seeing two trends. The parents themselves are so head down trying to survive, they're not even thinking about it. It's usually either the kids that are looking at the options and they're kind of going through every university. It's like, it's all plastic. It's all the same thing.
All the same thing.
Every website's exactly the same.
All the
Every
marketing material.
It's just like this plastic. How do you choose between these different? It's the same thing.
Yeah, it's the exact same marketing every single time. It's wild.
It's crazy, And so the students are now starting to say to us, like, I just don't really see the value. And if I'm looking at a debt cycle, if I'm looking at $160,000 of debt that I'm going to pay off when I'm 40, so there's a lot of considerations happening in their mind. Now, the ones that are, so we're here in Austin. So there's 67,000 kids currently enrolled in Austin Community College. Dallas-Fort Worth, there's about 350,000 kids in the community college in Dallas-Fort Worth. Those are the ones that are just like, I'm just trying to knock off 60 credit hours before I transfer somewhere. Give me a better option. That's really the low-hanging fruit for us. They're not, having to choose between Brown, UT, Yale, and they have this whole prestige weight that if they say no to this university, they're like, oh, what have I done? Like, I don't love it, but how can I say no? That's actually not the majority of the market that's out there. Like, we talk about the prestige market. We talked about the 10, 12, 20%. There's the 60, 80% that is like, I want a job. I want to get married. I want to have kids. I don't want debt. I want to run a good business. I want to build something that's beautiful. I don't know how to do it. I'm looking at not being able to afford a home. I'm looking at debt. I'm looking at all these kind of broken structures. That is the demographic that is actually coming to us saying, we want something new. Like, something is broken. Something stinks in Denmark. I don't buy it anymore, So there's that demographic. Then there's the whole trades demographic. So later this afternoon, I'm meeting with Micro to talk about what does a trades, local entrepreneurship kind of program look like. That's beginning to emerge. And then you have your kind of quote unquote elite that are still kind of stuck in that space of, we've got to go to a top 20 university. I want experiences. Sometimes those experiences are football games, in which case I basically say, we're not going to try to compete with the football games, But if you want study abroad, if you want Oxford, if you want Cambridge, if you want Jerusalem, if you want Brazil, if you want DC, we can design. This is the great impulse of the homeschool movement. If it's done anything, the homeschool movement has failed to create a normative alternative, unfortunately, because I do think it provides some of the best, highest quality academic outcomes. But they failed to create a normative frame that says freedom, flexibility, affordability, access to local mentorship, access to elders. What a great model. They didn't do that. They kind of, they retreated from the cultural frame. What I'm wanting to do with Christian Halls, it feels a little bit more like creating a hopefully non-grifty version of certified organic. You can go big box Monsanto, food stores where you can't, even plant the seeds from the fruit that you eat. It's all plastic. None of it's reproducible. Or you can go homegrown, local, certified organic, human formation. So if we're going to create kind of a normative change in the culture, we're going to have to play in these elite spaces. And to do that, we can't just say, here's 2 or 3 tutors and you're never going to leave your town. Like, we have to say, here are opportunities for you to go and learn, influence, and honor your community and your country and your county. So, but those are the kind of flexible spaces that we can live in. We can go design into those. And so if you look at that stratification of, there's ethnicity, Hispanic, African-American, Anglo, there's also a huge segmentation. If you're a Anglo-Saxon heritage in the Appalachians, totally different demographic than if we're talking about blue blood elite in Raleigh, North Carolina. And so we have to play within those different spaces and say, how do we build a self-governing model that prioritizes the flourishing of this space in Raleigh? Well, that's going to be a different expression. It's going to be a different, almost social register, kind of an elite register that says we're going to be doing some different things in Raleigh with the upper class in Raleigh than we would be doing in Western Montana, where we are. But that's the kind of localism that you're talking about. That's the kind of flexibility that we need to be able to build, instead of having a plastic cookie cutter universal structure that has no respect for local places and no understanding of what it takes to actually flourish at the local level. And that's the kind of flexibility that we're trying to build.
One of the things that you've emphasized a lot is the skills training, the career preparedness aspect of what you're offering students. But you also went through very elite education institutions that have a very heavy emphasis on the liberal arts, the sort of well-rounded mind. And you've talked too about the formation of character, which is just as much and arguably far more about the liberal arts than it is about, your pragmatic training for the workforce. How do you think about the balance of those two things in the programs that you offer? Because it sounds like the degree programs that you're partnering with are much more heavily focused on the sort of technical preparedness side of things than they are about the liberal arts. And you've suggested criticisms of how these institutions would teach the liberal arts in the first place. How do you build that into your program offerings?
That's a great question. So we do offer, I had to build with one of our universities a full kind of Oxford great books, liberal arts, kind of great books tradition program, because we are very concerned about core human virtue formation, whether you're doing welding or whether you're doing politics, philosophy, and economics, right? What's interesting about what you said is, yes, I have basically pursued a humanities track with everything that I've ever done. But if you dig deep enough into my family history, my family is all Montana Mennonite farmers. And so
my family's Pennsylvania Mennonite farmers.
Well, we could just start
Pennsylvania and Ohio.
There you go.
We'll come back to this.
Yeah, we'll come back to that
game later.
So I'm all Hofers and Diekmans and Isaacs and Cheddars. So a very, very long tradition of hyper-local, deeply rooted to the land, deeply rooted to trades, deeply rooted to a self-governing, self-sustaining structure that prioritizes multi-generationalism. So a lot of the kind of core DNA that I've pulled over into this kind of education space is actually coming out of that agrarian, context. Now, we don't all live in an agrarian context, and very few of us can go buy a farm, right? So how do we create an ecosystem that is not just focused on, kind of a Wendell-Berryan vision of, well, we should all just be working on the farm? I actually think that's a misconstrual of what he was doing. I don't think he's saying we should all go work on the farm. I think he's saying this is what we lost when we moved away from an agrarian society. How do you rebuild it in a technologically driven kind of urban context? So to answer your question, when we launch a trade program, time and time and time again, our trade businesses will tell us, I don't just need somebody that can wrench. I need somebody that I can trust in their virtue and their character to send out to $1 million tractor, and I can trust that they're going to have the wisdom and the knowledge and the virtue to actually do this in a high character manner. And so combining within the classical tradition, the common arts, so they would have called it servile arts, but the common arts, so that you're training virtuous tradesmen that can, first of all, work well, second of all, can manage organizations so that they can actually bring on and train other people. That's the kind of vision that we would have. So I don't really kind of divide virtue formation and character formation from the skilled trades, despite them having been that having been done for so long in this country. And so a lot of the programs that we built is, you can come in and do a certified welding program, but you can stack that on to an associate's of liberal arts and come out with a bachelor's of business with a certification in welding. I'm not going to try to sell you that product. I'm just going to try to say, what do you need? How do we layer on the services that you and your community have decided you want to offer? If you just want like licensure in a particular trade, great, let's do that. If we want to build that onto a college program so that you have a bachelor's or whatever, also fine. If you need an MBA to help you kind of run a family business, we'll layer that on as well. That's the kind of service, like client-focused service model. Instead of us going product, people, place, we can go place, people, product. And so I would hope that everything that we do is focused on cultivating virtue, whether it is, a classicist that we're trying to train, which I'll take as many young kids that want to go into the classics as possible. But we probably need a lot more HVAC technicians than we need classicists, especially in the post-secondary space. So how do we push that into these communities?
I have to ask you, now that I know that your background is also long lines of Mennonite farmers, I'm very curious both how far removed from that you are, like was this your grandparents' generation, your parents' generation, but also how it has affected the way that you think about community. Because my mom's side of the family is the Mennonite side. My dad's side is Jewish and evangelical. Like I'm a weird mix of a lot of different things.
Me too. Yep.
But I grew up with my grandparents' generation on my mom's side, very deeply rooted in the Mennonite community. And I think it shaped my sense of generations and community and family structure more than I realized. It took me a while to sort of unwind how much that affected how I think about how the world is structured. I'm very curious how that influence affects the work that you do.
We could spend another hour just unwrapping and unwrapping.
We may have to have you back to talk about this because this is very interesting to me.
And I would say it's a very similar kind of discovery because my mom grew up in Montana before she met my dad, who was a Nebraska farm boy. And then they moved to Brazil in '94 as missionaries in theological education. And so
were
my dad,
they Mennonite missionaries?
No, they were independent.
Because I have another friend whose family was Mennonite missionaries in Paraguay.
Yes, and we know tons of family that lives across Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay, Mexico, Argentina. But my mom grew up with a head covering, so not that far removed. And we have a very close-knit family. And so on the Isaac side, which is my mom's side, they're mainly southern Canada, Alberta, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and the northern Montana. And so we go up there every 4 years to our family reunion, and there are between my great-grandfather to my youngest, there's about 550 cousins, right?
Wow.
So they just open up the doors of, pick one of the farms, and everybody comes in every 4 years. And it's funny when there's 5 of us siblings, when my brothers bring their wives with us for the first time, when they brought their wives, the wives are like huddled over in the corner, like, and we're like, yes. They're like, it makes so much sense now. like the way you guys are is these people. Like, and we're not in the Mennonite church. Unfortunately, most of the Mennonite churches really have gone off the deep end in their kind of social liberal teaching and whatnot. So we would no longer associate with the Mennonite church. But culturally, it's all there. Like you can't, and in fact, my grandfather's Hutterite, which is even more. It's like colony, like 16th century Swiss, like Hutterite. And there's the saying you can take the Hutterite out of the colony, but you can't take the colony out of the Hutterite, you know. And there is a deep cultural expression that says, why are we abandoning our children to a homeless, rootedless, fiscally non-solvent way of doing life? Why have we destroyed our family units and destroyed our communities? For what? To serve whom? And it serves elements that don't love our communities or our families. It serves corporate elements, nationalist elements, multinational elements that are just saying, yeah, we don't really care about those family structures. There is more there than we could probably even unwrap on this. But I would say
we'll come back to this.
I'd say it's given me the deeply rooted moral, cultural courage to say, this is not normal. Whatever happened, this is not good. It's not beautiful. It's not normal. And I know that there's another way because I've smelled it and I've tasted it and I've lived it. How do we rebuild what formation and flourishing should actually look like? And I think that's the great challenge that we're trying to face with Christian Halls.
This has been so much fun. We could keep going for probably a couple more hours. We will have to do this again. In the meantime, if people are interested in what you're doing, if they want to learn more, if they want to support you, if they're hearing what you're talking about and saying, my community needs one of these, where can they learn more?
Yep. Go to christianhalls.org. That's Christian, Halls, christianhalls.org. If you want to see an example of how we're building this in one of our communities, we've got about 180 currently operating. We think we can go to every county if we can find the right partners. And so if you're looking at your town or your county and you're saying, yeah, I think we could build this here. We know our mentors. We know our elders. This would be an amazing deployment into our community. We'd love to hear from you. christianhalls.org. But if you want to look at an example of that, christianhalls.org/Permian, like Permian Basin, just to see how this kind of multi-site, multi-hall ecosystem can emerge quickly to really transform a local community. Check us out.
This has been so much fun. Thank you so much for making the time.
My pleasure.
All right, my friends, that is a wrap for today. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I hope that you found this valuable. Please leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify. Please like the video on YouTube. And please don't forget to subscribe on whatever platform you listen to make sure that you don't miss next week's episode. Thank you so much, friends. I will see you next week.